On a pale, ordinary morning in the eastern waters off China, a quiet paradox unfolded. Dozens of ships and aircraft moved through international sea lanes under rules designed to prevent war. The chosen target was not random. Out on the open ocean, more than 180 nautical miles from the Chinese coastline, the cruiser USS Princeton cut through the swells. It was one of the lunged forward. The cruiser noticed first. There was no drama in the detection, just a small change in symbols on a screen in the Combat Information Center. A track that had been moving leisurely now showed a sharp bend in its course line and a sudden spike in speed. Algorithms flagged the maneuver as aggressive. The threat status quietly rose from medium to high. Sailors slid into their rehearsed roles. Weapon systems shifted to ready, safeties intact, but distance calculations alive and constantly updated. The order that mattered most was the calmest: maintain composure and discipline. One ship did not stand alone. Over the horizon, the nuclear-powered carrier USS Nimitz and her escorts formed the real heart of the American presence. The moment Princeton confirmed the hostile acceleration, the carrier strike group shifted as if one organism. General quarters spread through passageways. Bulkhead phones and data links carried clip confirmations. Ships eased into a multi-layered defensive circle around the carrier, poles trading places by a few hundred yards to build overlapping arcs of responsibility. The technical name for what they formed: destroyers Chung Hoon and Kidd from the carrier's own systems, from aircraft overhead, fed into the same digital bloodstream. Link 16 terminals shared tracks, elevations, speeds. The combat systems did not care which metal mast a radar dish was bolted to. The data became a common tactical picture. If Princeton could see a threat with clarity, Nimitz could see it with the same clarity. If Kidd had a firing solution, Princeton could launch on it. In that web, each hull was only a node. The Chinese destroyer had hoped to intimidate a single cruiser. Instead, its burst of speed now glowed like a flare in the center of a network that spanned sky, surface, and the water column below. Higher up the chain, another piece of the Chinese plan came alive. On the flight deck of the carrier Shandong, crews in bright vests moved around squat, muscular J-15 fighters. Unlike American carriers, Shandong had no catapults to hurl heavy jets into the air. It relied on a ski jump ramp at the bow. That choice, born of design limits and history, whispered a more sobering truth to every pilot who rolled toward the ramp. The aircraft could not leave the deck with both full fuel tanks and a heavy weapon load. Something had to be cut. Shorter legs, fuel missile, reduced options once they reached the edge of another Navy's air defenses. Engines roared as the first J-15 hurtled up the ramp and into the sky, its nose pitching upward more for survival than showmanship. Others followed until a small combat air patrol circled over. The carrier group. On television back home, it would look impressive. Sleek fighters banking against the clouds, guardians of the homeland's flagship. Inside American operations rooms, the visual spectacle translated into calculated weaknesses. The J-15's old AL-31 engines were known for heavy fuel consumption and spotty reliability. The airframe owed its lines to an aging Russian design, heavy and less nimble than newer WestJets. The radar in its nose lacked the range and resolution of the phased array sets carried by its potential opponents. From Nimitz, the answer came as a routine, almost casual sequence of launches. F/A-18F Super Hornets left the deck under the shove of electromagnetic catapults, heavy with long-range air-to-air missiles, and external fuel tanks. Their calculus was the reverse of the J-15's. Full payloads, and the comfort of knowing that tankers could refuel them in midair, doubling or tripling their effective time on station. Higher still, E-2D Hawkeye early warning aircraft lifted off and took up their orbits, their big rotating radomes sweeping out circles of surveillance that reached hundreds of. Modern air combat is fought first in the spectrum rather than in the visible sky. When the Growlers began their work, The pilots in the J-15s did not see the aircraft themselves. They saw the symptoms. On their radar screens, clear tracks blurred into fuzz. Real returns vanished behind curtains of white noise or multiplied into ghostly echoes. False targets blossomed where no plane flew. The powerful jamming pulses from the American aircraft did not just blind the fighter radars. They reached down to the surface, warping the signals from Chinese ground-based and ship-based radar sites as well, including those on Hainan Island. The result was brutal in its simplicity. The American network retained its sight. Hawkeye crews saw each J-15's altitude and bearing relayed through Link 16 to every cockpit and ship in the group. Super Hornet radars, designed from the start to work in a contested electromagnetic environment, could still lock on. To conserve fuel, they held close, reducing drag, but also presenting fat clusters of heat and radar reflections. Exactly the kind of group targets an enemy fire control system loves. They tried to press closer to the American formation to show presence, but every kilometer forward was another minute burned from their already limited endurance. When Chinese commanders on the flagship saw mysterious tracks racing toward Shandong on their degraded screens, they reacted as doctrine demanded. Surface-to-air missiles arced up toward coordinates that looked threatening. Not one of those invisible intruders existed. They were phantoms shaped by the Growlers' deception techniques. White noise, false target space just right to mimic real aircraft. Warheads exploded in empty air, expending magazine depth and revealing to American analysts listening quietly on the sidelines how the system behaved under stress. The battle for the sky, in any conventional sense, never happened. No dogfight drive. No missile trails stitched across clouds. Yet by the time 7 tense hours had passed, the outcome was as clear as if wreckage smoked on the waves. The Americans controlled the airspace without firing. The J-15s, short on fuel and fighting half-blind, had little choice but to turn back toward their carrier, their retreat later wrapped in the neutral language of training cycles and scheduled recovery. Faith cannot armor steel. It cannot overcome empty fuel tanks. Beneath all of this, another drama played out in the dark. Cold layer under the waves. The U.S. Navy had not come to these waters with only surface hulls and fighters. It carried with it a philosophy of layered anti-submarine warfare honed over decades. On the outer ring, P-8, a Poseidon patrol aircraft carved great ovals over the sea, their sensors sniffing for anomalies in temperature, sound, and magnetism. They dropped sonobuoys in patterns, like invisible minefields, each buoy listening and whispering back its findings over encrypted radio. In the middle layer, the Arleigh Burke destroyers dragged sonar arrays through the water and operated helicopters fitted with dipping sonars and lightweight torpedoes. In the inner ring, hardest to see and most decisive, nuclear attack submarines of the Virginia and Los Angeles classes glided almost silently, tracking anything that sounded out of place. Against this, China had dispatched a Type 39 diesel-electric submarine, a capable hunter in coastal waters and shallow seas. Its mission was straightforward and dangerous. Shadow the American carrier group, try to slip inside the protective ring, and find a launch position where a spread of heavyweight torpedoes could threaten the hull of Nimitz itself. For a time, the quiet battery-powered motors and cautious speed kept it safe. The ocean is vast, and even the best sensors are not omnipotent. The moment of failure was almost mundane. Somewhere under the surface, a commander ordered a sudden turn, perhaps to tighten the trail behind the U.S. column, perhaps to avoid a patch of seabed. The maneuver demanded more from the boat's machinery. Humps, gears, and shafts complained just loudly enough. Those sounds, normally buried in the background, spiked above the threshold of American sonar operators who had been staring at waterfalls of acoustic data for hours. On the destroyer USS Kidd, someone marked the trace, then another operator on a different platform saw the same pattern. Sonobuoys from a passing Poseidon added their signatures. A submerged Virginia-class boat listened to the faint change in the water's music. Triangulation is a patient art. Within minutes, the rough position of the Type 39 hardened into a tight fix at about 200 meters depth. The American boats and ships did not attack. They did something both subtler and, in a way, crueler. After remaining unseen for more than a week, one of the U.S. nuclear submarines surfaced within sight of Shandong, roughly 6 nautical miles away. A long, dark hull rising from the sea told a simple story. An enemy-killing machine had been lurking inside the carrier's defensive umbrella all along, detected the supposed hunter first, and chosen to reveal itself only as a message. The message did not need words. It said that the flagship's underwater shield was porous, that the formation could be penetrated at will, and that any real war fought under such conditions would end badly. Back on Princeton, as all this played out above and below, the human strain felt sharper than the lines on any tactical display. General quarters meant every sailor who belonged at A. Battle station was already there, strapped into chairs, standing by consoles, or sealed inside engineering compartments. Weapons crews had their targets assigned, and their fingers and arm's length. From controls, medical teams waited in quiet corridors with stretchers and trauma kits, hoping never to use them. Every person aboard knew a collision, a misread signal, a single impulsive squeeze of a trigger could turn the standoff into a shooting war that no one truly wanted. The Chinese destroyer continued its charge, closing to within a handful of nautical miles. Its commanders relied on speed and proximity to raise the psychological temperature, to create the impression that the Americans were teetering on the edge of having to act. Political masters ashore expected at least a photograph, perhaps a radar track showing the U.S. cruiser turning aside. A forced course change, no matter how small, would be advertised as proof that a rising power could push back against an old hegemon. On Princeton, the answer was stubbornly untheatrical. The ship held its assigned track. Escorts from the Nimitz group slid slightly outward, building a living shield without resorting to ramming or dangerous close passes. Fire control solutions stayed locked, but safety stayed on. Internal communications repeated the same instructions. Keep position, maintain target lock, await authorized orders. It was not passivity. It was a form of active restraint backed by the confidence that if the worst happened, the network would respond within seconds with overwhelming force. The contrast between the two approaches could not have been starker. One side leaned on political pressure, on the hope that bold gestures and fast runs would unsettle a rival. The other trusted in decades of training, a culture that treated firing the first shot as a last resort, and a sophisticated architecture that made panic unnecessary. Technology amplified the difference. Chinese forces had numbers and a home field coastline, but they lacked a unified tactical picture. Air crews and surface captains saw only shards of the battle, each distorted by jamming and narrow. Sensor cones, American crews, linked by cooperative engagement capability and Link 16, saw an integrated battle space from deep water to the upper atmosphere. Eventually, even theater must bow to physics. Jet fuel drained toward low fuel warnings. Submarines needed to recharge batteries. Crews on the destroyer that had started the drama watched their engine temperatures and the clock. After more than 7 hours of tension, orders filtered through Chinese circuits to reduce speed, to recover aircraft, to treat the encounter as an exercise successfully completed. Public statements later would echo that line. The story told in ready rooms and wardrooms, however, was quieter. The attempt to force a warship from its path had failed, and the balance of information and control had favored the other side from the first moment. For analysts and officers studying the incident afterward, several truths stood out. Superior coordination, those unromantic acronyms like CEC and LINK. 16 had mattered more than raw counts of hulls or aircraft. Electronic warfare platforms, such as the Growler, had shown how a handful of specialized jets could neutralize an entire wings. situational awareness, and even trick long-range missile batteries into wasting shots. Anti-submarine layers built from Poseidons, destroyers, and nuclear boats had turned a quiet hunter into a track target. Strict discipline and the conscious avoidance of a first shot had prevented a political stunt from spiraling into a shooting war. On the other side of the ledger, Chinese flaws were equally obvious. Reliance on speed and close-in intimidation created risks without delivering real leverage against a composed opponent. J-15 performance limits in fuel and payload constraint. Any attempt at sustained pressure. The lack of a unified, jam-resistant tactical picture left pilots and captains making decisions in the dark. Vulnerability to electronic and undersea warfare meant that even impressive-looking forces could find themselves playing a game whose rules someone else controlled. In a scorebook that counted missiles fired and ships destroyed, the result would read, strangely, the United States won 1-0 without firing a single shot. Yet that odd tally captured something fundamental about modern great power encounters at sea. Victory can mean imposing structure and order on chaos, keeping a dangerous situation inside well-understood boundaries, while still signaling that lines exist which must not be crossed. Power is not only the ability to strike, but the demonstrated freedom to refrain from striking while remaining unbowed. It is important to remember what this story is and what it is not. The scenario is a constructed one, stitched together from open information about hardware, doctrine, and past incidents, then pushed a little farther to explore what might happen if those patterns collided on a particular day. It does not recount an actual engagement, and it does not claim to speak for any government or military. The value lies in the way it illuminates trends already visible, the race for better networks, the growing centrality of data and electronic warfare, the inherent danger of political theatrics played out with real ships and aircraft. In that sense, the episode functions as a quiet warning. In crowded, contested seas, the line between signaling and miscalculation is thin. A destroyer's sudden acceleration, a fighter pilot chasing a blip through jamming, a submarine commander turning A little too sharply. Each action is small by itself, but together they can pull nations toward outcomes no one intended. The only durable safeguard is a combination of technology that clarifies rather than obscures, and a professional culture that prizes restraint as much as courage. Stories like this one help map those hazards. They translate technical acronyms and cold specifications into human tension and split-second choices. They remind observers that behind every track on a screen stands a crew living with the consequences. Keeping such narratives alive, examining them, and questioning them is one quiet way the world can stay alert to the realities of modern conflict. A simple act of support, like a subscription, a click on a notification bell, keeps this kind of detailed storytelling viable and encourages deeper explorations of the forces shaping the oceans where so much of global order still sails.